Welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel, to our live stream lecture for Columbus Day 2020, or Indigenous Peoples Day 2025. We are doing a special this weekend because of the 3-day weekend. So we did two Q&As yesterday and Saturday, and we are going to be doing a live stream lecture today about Christopher Columbus and about his discovery, quote unquote, of the New World, which really was just him creating sustained European contact with the Americas, which obviously is extremely consequential for human history. You can't have the story of the Western world and how it developed without Columbus's voyages, and obviously creating sustained contact between Spain and the New World. However, we're also going to talk about the Native Americans, and obviously their contributions to this continent before, during, and after the colonization by the Europeans. So we're going to find a nice, appropriate Colombian or Native background, depending on which one I can find first. But I hope you're all having a great day and enjoying yourselves. Hopefully some of you have a day off for this very popular holiday, which in recent years has kind of undergone a change to become Indigenous Peoples Day, as people can become more and more aware of the legacy of Christopher Columbus and the large amounts of harm he brought to the native peoples, and people become more open to celebrating Native Americans. They have replaced his holiday with celebration of the Native Americans, which is good, but probably too superficial and ephemeral, and I will explain all of that during the live stream lecture. And I will talk a little bit about how the holiday came to be and why it's been replaced in more recent years and all of that. But let me see. Do I have a good background here? I'm looking for something Colombian. By the way, of course, Colombia, the country, is named after Christopher Columbus, but there is a reason why the continents that he helped to discover are not actually named after him. So we will discuss that as well today in our live stream lecture. If you enjoy history and social studies, you're in the right place. Consider liking and subscribing and becoming a friendly neighborhood historian. It's as easy as all of that. I can't see the chat right now, so hopefully my moderators are here and put the social media handles there. You can follow us and get updates and early access to some content there as well. Consider any donations you make to the channel, consider doing that, a super chat, or becoming a member, or watching our videos and ad revenue. All of that goes back into the channel to make the experience of the Friendly Neighborhood History community as good as possible. And if you want to become a Friendly Neighborhood Historian, it's as easy as liking and subscribing. So let's see here. Where can I find a good background image of something from that era? Native or otherwise. A few of these look good, but I'm not sure about them. But hope everybody's having a good Monday. We're going to be releasing a redone version of our Columbus Day video that we made last year at 8 p.m. Eastern, so go check it out. Members will have early access to that, but that's an 8 p.m. Eastern release today of our video about Columbus Day and Indigenous Peoples Day and why both are celebrated and both are very popular. Let's see here. Going through all of it. Let's see. Oh, I had it right there. All right, so this is a good one, and we've already got a super chat, and thank you so much. Super chats are easy. Amir, thank you so much. I'm not going to be interacting with the chat that much, but I will be doing my best to interact with it later. Maybe we'll even have a Q&A at the very end. It all depends on timing. It's been a very busy season, but make sure to like and subscribe. It helps the algorithm and everything. Emir, I really appreciate your super chat. But this is Columbus, and this is him before the court of Queen Isabella of Castile and Leon, and her husband, King Ferdinand of Aragon, who united Castile, Leon, and Aragon into one kingdom, basically in order to create the Spanish kingdom, which would become the Spanish Empire, thanks to Columbus. So, basically, for centuries, Spain had been controlled by the Muslims as the land known as Al-Andalus, and had slowly but surely started to retake the land with the help of other Christians in the forms of different crusades, and of course their own efforts and campaigns known as the Reconquista. And this is part of the legend of the famous Spanish soldier and fighter Al Cid. And eventually, in the 1400s, they had gained the upper hand, and the majority of the Iberian Peninsula had been liberated. Portugal had been liberated quite some time before the rest of Spain was. But in 1492, Isabella and Ferdinand, who had been married for about 15 years and whose two kingdoms were the dominant forces in Iberia, had defeated the Muslims and kicked them out of Granada. The Emirate of Granada was the last Moorish Muslim stronghold in southern Spain. This was a huge victory for the Spanish, a huge victory for the Christians. And in order to celebrate this, they decided to splurge a little bit, and they decided to finance the voyage of Christopher Columbus. Now, who was Christopher Columbus? Christopher Columbus was a Genoese Italian merchant who actually turns out to be Sephardic Jewish and originally from Spain, who grew up in Italy, whose father was a merchant, and who became, from a very young age, associated with different expeditions and travels to different areas and different islands around. This is the beginning of the ages of exploration. The idea that Columbus is the first man to ever get in a boat and travel around for Spain or in the for the Iberians is made up. It was actually his first major. The Portuguese were already traveling around. And it's also, I'll dispel a couple other myths. Columbus was not trying to prove that the world was round. The most intellectual people believe that the earth was round. Belief in the earth being spherical, round, or elliptical had dated back to the ancient Greeks. And Columbus's mistake, or his theory, wasn't that the earth was round and no one believed him. It was that the earth was a lot smaller than he had thought. So for years, the Christians of Europe had been struggling with trying to trade with China and India, and they had to go through the Silk Road, which meant they went through the Middle East, which means they encountered different Muslims, which they already didn't like. And after Constantinople was destroyed by the Ottomans, the new powerful Muslim empire, they had even more chagrin about going over through the Middle East and the Silk Road in order to get to India and China. But they knew that India and China could be reached by going to the east. And the Portuguese were actually already finding ways to do this. They were trading in Africa, and eventually a man named Vasco da Gama is going to go around the bottom of Africa, the Cape of Good Hope, and that's going to allow him to eventually get to India. So the Europeans were aware that if you traveled eastward, you would be able to get to India and eventually China and later on Japan. What they didn't know is that you could go west and get there. At least they weren't sure of that, and that was Columbus's main idea. And if you study history, if you like history, well, first, welcome, please like and subscribe, because this channel is jam-packed with history of all different kinds and backgrounds. But Columbus himself knew that very well, that history was about ideas, and his major idea, his major thesis, and his major hypothesis was that if you went westward, you could get to India, China, and Japan, and the rest of Asia a lot quicker than if you went eastward. So he believed the earth was a lot smaller, and if you went westward, you would eventually hit India and China. And he actually turned out to be correct, but he underestimated the size of the earth. Because there really wasn't a huge amount of knowledge about what lay beyond the West. The ancients had believed in what was called the Pillars of Hercules, the Straits of Gibraltar, and beyond this was an ocean, and some had believed that Atlantis was there. Obviously, the Vikings had proven that this was all mythical. They had gone to Greenland and Iceland during the 9th and 10th and 11th centuries, and some of them had even landed in Newfoundland in modern-day Canada and set up a couple of colonies there that were later either wiped out or died off. So Columbus was not the first European to get to the Americas. Obviously, he wasn't the first person to get to the Americas. Polynesian, Asian, and Siberian peoples had traversed either over by sea or the Bering Strait to settle and inhabit the North and South American continents thousands, perhaps even tens of thousands of years before there ever was a Christopher Columbus. At the same time, the Vikings were the first Europeans, probably, to reach that land, but they hadn't created sustained contact. What I like to say is that Columbus is responsible for creating sustained, long-term contact between Europe and North and South America, and this would obviously change the course of all of human history and be extraordinarily important for everything. And basically, no matter what you think about Christopher Columbus, no matter what you think about what we should call the holiday, no matter your interpretation of how the Native Americans were treated, spoilers, they were treated terribly, the truth of the matter is you can't have the Western world in the way that it exists today without without Columbus and his voyages and his discoveries and the subsidiary discoveries, colonizations, and conquests of the Spanish, the Portuguese, and later the Dutch, the French, and the English. The truth of the matter is that also has an extreme effect on the rest of the world as well, not just the Western world. You don't just get the United States and Canada because of that, and Mexico and Latin America because of the Spanish influence, starting with Columbus. You also get the development of Europe as the intercontinental superpower over and against China, India, and large countries and kingdoms in Africa. What allowed the Europeans to basically become the predominant force in world affairs, where so much of the globe, which will allow them to colonize and imperialize Africa, large sections of Asia, and will basically bring us to the point where geopolitics in the 19th and 20th centuries is predominantly a European-centered issue, be it the Cold War or the two world wars of the 20th century. The real truth of the matter is the Europeans were able to become so powerful and overpowered against other rival empires and kingdoms that once were greater than them, such as the Chinese and the Ottomans and many different African kingdoms, simply because, and that couldn't have happened without their colonization of the Americas. So the colonization of the Americas not only creates the Western world the way it is and allows Europe to rise to power, but it also has a huge impact and major consequences on Africa and Asia as well. So basically, Columbus changes history. There is no way to get around it. Christopher Columbus changed history by what he did. Of course, he was wrong in his thesis and idea, and he remained stubborn and obstinate in the belief that he had indeed discovered India going westward. And which is part of why the region was called the West Indies. But it's not why the people that he encountered were called the Indians, and it's not why the word indigenous refers to native dwellers of an area. Columbus believed that the people he encountered were un gente en Dios. In his diary, he calls them a people in God, and that is actually the basis of referring to them. India was not known as India at the time. It was called Hindustan, the land of the Hindus. That is where Columbus was trying to reach. He knew that he could have gone eastward to do this, but he decided to go westward. He posited this idea originally to the Portuguese. The Portuguese didn't really want to do that. They had their own navigational schools. They had their own modes of transportation. If anyone really started European exploration, colonization, and the mercantile system where basically you're trying to get as much goods and land and colonies as you can, it's the Portuguese, and the Spanish come right in afterwards. They're already doing their own thing in Africa and going around and going eastward, so he's kind of laughed off a stage there. I think he proposes to a couple of others that doesn't really go anywhere. I think he even talked to the English at one point, but the Spanish are actually interested in this because they're splurging and celebrating their great victory. The truth of the matter is, in 1492, Columbus sailing the ocean blue is a footnote to Spain, to other bigger issues in world politics. Spain kicking out the Muslims and then banning and eventually exiling Islam and Judaism is are the big stories for the Spanish at the time. The discoveries of these lands and these voyages by Columbus, which will take him about 2 months. He sets sail in August of 1492, and he spots land in the Bahamas in October for his first voyage, is actually a footnote at first. It's only with retrospect in 50 years that the Spanish can look back and see how consequential Columbus's discoveries westward were in creating a massive empire that made them the most powerful force in the world. And anyways, thank you for joining us for our live stream lecture. We do this usually every Sunday, but we're doing a special one because of Columbus Day or Indigenous Peoples Day. So please like and subscribe and become a friendly neighborhood historian. I won't be interacting with the chat too much like I normally do for our Q&As, but I will later on. I'm talking about the history of Columbus, Columbus Day, the Indigenous Peoples, and Indigenous Peoples Day. And we're starting off by looking at how Columbus got to the Americas. So, but what happens next? Columbus sails for about 2 months. The Niña, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. Those are his 3 ships. I'm trying to remember which one he was on. But on October 12, 1492, according to Columbus's diary and journal, which is where we get most of the ideas and beliefs of Columbus regarding the natives, they sight land. It is most likely the island of San Salvador, Holy Savior, in the Bahamas. So Columbus doesn't get to the United States, he doesn't get to Canada, he doesn't get to Mexico, he doesn't get to South America, he doesn't get to any of those areas. In fact, he never sets foot on terra firma in either of the 2 Western Hemisphere continents. Instead, he lands almost exclusively in the Caribbean. And because he encounters a tribe known as the Caribs, he will name it the Caribbean. So that is where we get the idea of the Caribbean or the Caribbean. But his first voyage takes him to the Bahamas. His first voyage is the shortest of his voyages, and he encounters 2 tribes there. One is very peaceful and open to trade. They are the Taínos. The other tribe is the Caribs, which are known for being violent and were supposedly at war with the Taínos, and the Taínos are interested in employing the Spanish to help them fight against them. Columbus is interested in a couple of different things. Obviously, well, 3 to be specific. This is called the 3 Gs that historians talk about when it comes to New World colonization that's going to be appealing for Columbus, later Spaniards, and other Europeans. God, there's this idea of going off to these lands and spreading the Christian gospel to the natives of those lands, be they India, China, Japan, or later, of course, Native America. Second, gold, bringing riches and glory, precious gems. There's the legends of El Dorado, the city of gold. The idea that you can bring gold, silver, and precious stones back to you and make yourselves so rich because this land is literally crawling with it, where the streets are paved with gold. And so there's all sorts of economic opportunities. This will only be partially true. Silver mining will be a huge facet for the Spanish and later the Portuguese in South America, but there is another form of gold that comes from the cash crops the Europeans will harvest in the Caribbean and North and South America, including tobacco, sugar, cotton, indigo, rice, and corn, or mice, whatever you want to call it. Those all become huge major cash crops that are extremely influential in world trade and will change the course of human history, as well as affecting not just North America, South America, and Europe, but Africa as well. And it will allow Europe to become relatively wealthy, relatively prosperous, and probably give them the advantage over the Ottomans and the Chinese, who are the Ming Dynasty in China and the Ottomans in Asia, in Turkey and the Middle East. Here's another fascinating thing that adds a wrinkle to it. It could have easily been the Chinese who had gotten here coming eastward before Columbus went westward. The Chinese had been doing a series of extortionist flotillas called the treasure fleets of Zheng He during the early 15th century. What Zheng He had done was basically combine the military and naval might of the Chinese with an open mercantilist system in which they tried to trade and acquire goods and tribute from as many different principalities and regions of the South China Sea as possible. These had gone on for a number of years and had been extraordinarily successful. However, at the very end of the day, after Zheng He died, the Ming Dynasty decided to close down the treasure fleets and stop their explorations and their exacting of tributes and taxes. It could have easily been them who had discovered the Americas, perhaps even 40 years before Columbus, extorting wealth, tribute, and goods from those lands and creating client states and vassal states for the Ming Dynasty. So imagine the history of the New World starting in places like California, Peru, and Alaska, rather than in the Caribbean and Mexico, like it does with the Spanish. So there's that possibility in the hypothetical world that China might have become the predominant power, as they already were, far more powerful than Spain, far more powerful than France, far more powerful than England or Russia. They might have been the ones to actually create a new world empire before Spain does. So what happens next? Columbus, in his second voyage, will encounter the two major islands of his discovery, that is Hispaniola, and of course Puerto Rico is another one, but Hispaniola, which is the Dominican Republic and Haiti today, and of course Cuba. And Cuba will become huge because of sugar and tobacco. That will be the first major place for colonization. They all become centers of colonization, but also places for building plantations, and basically either enslaving the natives or forcing them to work for very low wages in order to grow crops that will be sold back in European markets that become extremely popular, such as sugar and tobacco. Columbus continues to believe he is in India. He believes the natives, the people un gente indios, the Indians, are open and susceptible to the Christian gospel, but they also are open and susceptible to being enslaved. He views them as savages. They are half naked, running around without civilization. They do not have a wheel, a written language, or cities, and so Columbus sees them, as many people even still to this day see them, as completely backwards people. Now, Columbus obviously doesn't have 500 years of history and building of multicultural understanding and lens. He doesn't have exposure to the rest of the world the way we do today to understand the diversity of the Native American culture. And this is a problem that historians, sociologists, and people who are trying to score weird political points miss to this day. There are two sides to this debate that are really, really messed up, in my opinion, and this will lead us to the Indigenous Peoples Day argument. But basically, on the one end, people want to say that the Native Americans were peaceful, harmonious with nature, and completely peaceful and stable, and the Europeans came here and fudged everything up and ruined a good thing they had going, and they can't be blamed for almost anything, and look at these poor helpless victims. that is insulting in one way. Of course, the more obvious insult is to call them savages who deserve to lose their land, which is the other side of the argument, which will justify hundreds of years of colonization, war, and murder and dispossession of land from Columbus and other Europeans, and later the United States and Canada, as well as many Hispanic countries. But Columbus, or sorry, but the other side is, I think, almost as condescending in the idea that it sees the Native Americans as people without agency. The Native Americans are used oftentimes as political talking points, and broad brush strokes are often taken when people just refer to them as the Native Americans, rather than realizing the huge amount of diversity that the Native Americans had, just as much, and perhaps even more so, than the Europeans. You're talking about people that stretch over two continents and a large archipelago. They're going to be very diverse. The Nez Perce have almost nothing in common with the Inca. The Tainos that Columbus encounters in the Bahamas are not at all like the Algonquin that meet the Pilgrims for the first Thanksgiving. These peoples are very different and act very differently. Now they have similarities and commonalities because just like the Europeans or the Asians do, they obviously have certain ethnic a certain shared ethnic background and certain cultural amenities that they share. Many Native Americans had some sort of idea of communal property, lack of borders, a very, very holistic view of nature, almost a pantheistic idea where everything is alive and every part of nature is working with each other. So there's this kind of communal attitude towards land, towards nature, but towards wildlife that many Native Americans, particularly in the North American area, have. Native Americans in many different tribes in many different areas are known for thanking the spirits of the animals when they kill the animal for their meat and their pelts. Native Americans tend to be extremely itinerant. They are nomadic. They are hunter-gatherers. They do not develop language in cities, mainly because they do not develop advanced civilization. They don't feel the need to do that because they have such an acute awareness of the nature around them. They are really, really good at understanding crops for small-time farming. They're good at understanding how not to overhunt and kill off a species, and how to regulate their usage of different parts of nature. So this is a huge part of their cultural identity, and it goes for various different Native American tribes, regardless of where they are. You see this high view of nature. You also see this high affinity for travel, for itinerancy, and other things like that. So again, you can't broad brushstroke all the Native Americans, and there are hundreds of tribes, and some of these tribes are compiled into nations, like the Iroquois, the Sioux, the Algonquin, some of the Navajo. Some of these are based on completely on the names they use or the language they use. For instance, the Iroquois are called the Iroquois because the French call that their language that they use. Again, the natives generally do not have written language, but again, as you look at them and ancient humans who were similar in some ways in Mesopotamia, for instance, they do not feel, early farmers, hunter-gatherers, don't feel the need to settle down and build cities because they are completely dependent on what nature provides for them, so they don't feel the need to create renewable food resources, and they have such a strong affinity for the wildlife around them that as long as they don't abuse that, they know they will never run out. And they know enough about migration patterns, mating patterns, hibernation, that they are able to not exhaust their supplies of either crops or wildlife for hunting. So the Native Americans are in a little bit backwards compared to the Europeans when it comes to what we call civilization. Now, I'm not calling them uncivilized savages by any stretch of the imagination. The Native Americans, again, had their very distinct cultures. That many of them had their own artwork, beadwork, things like that. Developed their own styles of architecture. The Pueblo Indians in the southwest of the United States used adobe to build large living spaces in cities, the Pueblo as they are called. And then the Iroquois build longhouses in the Northeast. You get wigwams from the Algonquins. You get teepees from the Plains Indians, the Sioux. The natives will do different things based on where they are living. They have different styles of art. Beadwork is popular. Moccasins, bolos, headdresses, things like that. So they are not just complete savages with no ascetic qualities, with no connection to nature, with no understanding of the world around them. They are not stupid, and on the other end, they are not completely peaceful, harmonious, and never had a problem. They are stealing land, taking conquest. Enslavement was very common amongst Native Americans long before Columbus or the Vikings had ever shown up. Tribes would often be enslaved or made to be clients, vassals of other tribes, or land was taken back and forth, and the idea of sacred land was often very subjective, because land that was sacred for one group of natives, once they lost its sacredness, and then another area of land that they were able to move into gained a sense of sacredness. The Aztecs and the Mayans and the Olmecs, the Toltecs, the Zapotecs, the Incas, the natives of Central and South America are distinct. They build more developed societies and cities, and they also but they also don't develop the wheel. They have more of a written language. They have mathematics, astronomy. The Mayas are very, very complex compared to the natives of the north, but they too have a consistent pattern of what empires always do: colonization and conquest. So what happens is Columbus is not the first to do any of these things. He is the first European to do it, and he sees that it's ripe for the picking. Because he believes the natives are inferior, he believes that God has given them the right to enslave them, take their land for the glory of Spain, harvest all the crops that grow there, sell them in Europe, and also convert the natives, either forcibly or through more peaceable means, to the Christian faith. Now, Columbus is not the worst or most heavy-handed of the Spanish that come and settle this land and demand slaves, cash crops, and gold. He is pretty extreme. He enslaves the natives. He sells young women as brides, as young as the age of 9. He conquers and kills a lot of them. He fights battles with them, although more complex wars will come later. And although Columbus is not as extreme as some of the Spanish that come later, he is reprimanded for this by a very famous man named Bartolomé de las Casas, who is going to write a treatise in which he exposes and condemns the actions of enslaving the natives and mistreating them, believing that this is not cohesive with the Christian gospel. So Columbus is not any, in many ways, is not any better than the natives themselves were, but he's also not better than, but there are many other natives and Spanish who are better than Columbus in retrospect, and many who are worse. So Columbus's third voyage will take him to Trinidad, Tobago. He will get to Jamaica. The Spanish will colonize Jamaica, but later on that land will be taken by the English. In his fourth voyage, he goes along the coasts of Central and South America, tracing a path around there and actually spotting the lands of the continents themselves. Although he never lands on them, one of the countries will bear his name. Now, the continents should probably bear his name. In retrospect, he created sustained contact between the Europeans and these areas. The reason they do not is because Columbus claimed to the day he died that he had landed in India. And this is proven to be false by another Italian origin explorer named Amerigo Vespucci, who proves that these lands are not, who's sailing for the Spanish later on, proves that these are not indeed India, but actually their own new continents, and the continents will be named for him: Amerigo Vespucci, North and South America. And Vespucci, fun fact, it finds a particular land in South America so appealing to him, it reminds him of his home of Venice, and that's where we get Venezuela. So interesting stuff going on. And by the way, a lot of the Spanish, English, and early Portuguese explorers will be Italian in origin. The Venetians are some of the best traders, merchants, and seamen in the world at this time, and they will help out the Portuguese, Italians, and English and others greatly at this time. What happens next? So Columbus dies, I think 1506 is when he dies, right after his fourth voyage. Columbus is continually a victim of Spanish politics, infighting at court, and is in competition with others who are more extreme and more violent than even he is. Columbus originally, although was interested in the prospect of wanting to enslave natives, didn't do it until put under pressure to do so. Columbus obviously has a mixed bag. He brings European colonization enslavement, murder, violence, and warfare to these lands that hadn't seen them, at least with the Europeans, but he also creates sustained contact between the Europeans and North and South America that will shape the world the way it is today. So even if you don't like the way the world is today, it wouldn't exist in its sense without Columbus doing this. Now, there's a possibility that someone else could have come along around a similar time and done something a little bit different, but to expect the morality of 2025 to rule in 1492, whether it's Christopher Columbus or someone else from another country going there, is really, really heavy-handed. In all likelihood, the Chinese would have been just as intolerant had they landed in the western part of the Western Hemisphere rather than the eastern. Now, of course, there are exceptions to the rule, and there are those who colonize and settle who are far more peaceful, far more interested in communication, in sharing cultures and things like this. The French will have a better relationship with the natives than the Spanish or the English. However, they are often in the minority, and the society is not progressive enough to condemn slavery at this time. Slavery becomes the norm. Now, the big hit to the Native Americans is the exposure to disease that they will get from the Europeans, both in North, Central, and South America. But before I talk about that, this isn't a word from today's sponsor because we don't have a sponsor yet, but we will get one day. But just a quick trace of how colonization works. The Dutch will colonize parts of New York and New Jersey. They'll call it New Netherlands. New Amsterdam becomes their major city. That will, of course, eventually become the city of New York. They buy an island from a group of natives. The group of natives are known as the Manhattan, and that's where we get the name for the island of Manhattan. The French will colonize the middle of Canada all the way down, going in a diagonal towards New Orleans, which is the big port that they build in Louisiana, which they name after their king, Louis XIV. Samuel de Champlain, La Salle, and other explorers will obviously carve out a niche of French colonization in what's now the Midwestern United States, as well as sections of Canada, most notably Quebec. The English will be, the Portuguese, in a treaty with the Pope in 1494, are able to eventually justify the colonization of one large swath of land, and that is, of course, Brazil. They're not going to go any further west than that. The Spanish will destroy the Aztecs with Hernan Cortez, and then a decade later destroy the Incas with his cousin Francisco Pizarro, and so that will be the grounds for them colonizing Central and South America, respectively. Eventually, worried about the incursions of the French and the English, they will go up northwards into the American Southwest and West, colonizing California, Texas, and places like Nevada and Arizona. The English will be a little bit Johnny-come-lately. 1607, they arrive in Jamestown. This is after the French, Spanish, and Portuguese have already arrived, and about the same time that Henry Hudson is hired by the Dutch to sail up the river that will later bear his name and discover New Amsterdam. But the English will start in Jamestown with a mercantile company, a joint stock company there. Another company led by people seeking religious freedom, known as the Pilgrims, who are separatists from the Puritan branch, which is the Reformed branch of the Church of England, will arrive, and King James of England basically wants them gone because they're so religiously stubborn, and they will land in Plymouth Rock. Supposedly, they'll land in what becomes known as the colony of Plymouth. A decade later, more Puritans and separatists will land with them and form Massachusetts. And so you get the forming of the New England colonies in 1620, 1621, and the forming of Virginia in 1607. So that's how the English get there. In 1619, a huge moment is made when the English bring slaves. Now, slaves from Africa had already been brought by the Portuguese and Spanish. The reason this happens is that the Native Americans are not one of the biggest causes for the deaths and destruction of native societies is not warfare directly, but diseases brought by the Spanish and the other Europeans, which they don't have immunities built up for, and kill them off much more regularly than it does the Europeans. Smallpox, yellow fever, scarlet fever, things like this that can be deadly to the Europeans, but through genetics and through a long-term historical exposure, the Europeans have more resistance to. The natives find themselves completely helpless to stop, and they die off in huge numbers. This depletes their population. It cuts short their labor supply and will eventually lead the Europeans to start bringing in slaves from Africa. Africa is interested in European goods and cash crops brought from America. So the continents are now all trading with each other, and that creates what's called triangle trade. Now, not all of this can be laid at the feet of Columbus. He had no idea this was going to happen, but he does start the pattern of colonization, enslavement, and exposure to disease, which kills off the natives, and of course conquest and the harvesting of cash crops, which become far more lucrative than gold, silver, and precious stones because they're far more in abundance and they're far more liked by the Europeans. The Europeans continue, even after Columbus, to try to find passages, including into the history of the United States, the Northwest Passage, to get to Asia quicker by going through this. People like Francis Drake, who sailed for the English, Walter Raleigh will be doing stuff like this. By the way, the English's first colony is not Jamestown in 1607, but Roanoke in 1586. It's discovered and then it's lost. Nobody knows exactly what happens to the people there. They probably were killed off by natives. Powhatan, the father of the great Princess Pocahontas, Virginia Rolfe, will tell the Jamestown colonists that he is the one that killed them. By the way, a quick aside about the relationships between natives and Europeans. Far be it, especially in cases of the English, where we have more documentation because of the formation of the United States from their colonies, relations with the natives are not always just show up, enslave, and violence. Trade, mutual beneficence, working together, sometimes even being allies against other natives is common at first, but the dying off of natives at high rates due to disease, the encroachment of more and more colonists in more and more of the areas, and the demands for cash crops will lead to more and more enslavement of more and more natives. Columbus starts this pattern. His relationships with the natives are not immediately bad, but he does see the ability to take advantage of them, as do all the Europeans later on. Now, the natives have a lot of advantages at first. They have the home turf. They understand the topography, geography, and climate of their area. This is how the Algonquin are able to help the Pilgrims survive by basically teaching them how to farm and fish in that area of Massachusetts. But again, the dying off of the natives, the encroachment of more settlers, and the demand for more goods will eventually push the Europeans towards wiping out as many of the natives as possible. Oh yeah, and the Mayflower is how the Pilgrims got here, by the way. So that's a basic summary of Columbus and what he does. Obviously, Columbus remains a figure of a popular figure in American history. And although he is not the man who directly founded the United States, he obviously creates Columbian contact, Columbian exchange, where you get goods and diseases and culture being traded between the different groups. The natives do trade constantly with the Europeans. The natives buy weapons, guns, horses, things like that from the Europeans. So it's not always just extraction and stealing and exploitation. And the natives many times exploit and are extremely violent towards the Europeans and use the Europeans to help defeat other natives. And at first they have the advantages and Europeans have guns, but the guns are not as effective as native bows originally. That later on changes. And here's a map of what you get eventually. You get the Viceroyalty of New Spain, which will go up, that's New Mexico, that's Mexico into what is now New Mexico in the southwest. New Granada is kind of that land of Central and South America into Colombia. And then there's the Viceroyalty of Peru. Brazil is, of course, controlled by the Portuguese. And then you have the different Spanish colonies there. The French will eventually get Haiti, and the English will take over Jamaica. The French will control central parts of America and eventually sell part of it to the United States, the Louisiana Purchase. The 7 Years' War, better known by what we call it here, World War I, which is called the French Indian War in America, will bring Spain, Portugal, France, and England fighting on the continent, and eventually allow the English to win large sections of Canada over from the French, and the natives will lose their land. That's pretty much what happens. What else is happening? What else can I say? Columbus remains an important figure in American history. Ben Franklin wants to rename the United States Columbia after they declare independence from England to recognize Christopher Columbus as the man who set this all in motion. It would be very ignorant for us to say that Columbus did not change the world. It's just what were the effects of that. You can change the world for good and bad. Hitler changed the world. Mao changed the world. Stalin changed the world just the same way as Buddha and Jesus changed the world for good, I suppose. Or people like Martin Luther King changed the world. People can change the world, and that isn't always good, and that isn't always bad, and sometimes it's almost all good, and sometimes it's almost all bad. So Columbus is complex. There is obviously, we have to pay attention to the victim of history argument, but we also don't have to, we shouldn't lean on that to just excuse everything Columbus did. There were people alive at Columbus's time who knew what he was doing was wrong and told him, and he ignored them. And there were people who were harsher than Columbus, and there were people who were lighter than Columbus. Putting someone in a historical context does not excuse them for their sins. That doesn't mean that murdering, enslaving, and selling girls into you can guess what I'm going to say next, is good and right in 1500, was okay in 1500, and is bad today. It might be more culturally acceptable. That doesn't make it all right. By the way, as I've mentioned before, because the natives die off in 1619, the English bring the first African slaves to their colonies, which is where the 1619 project comes from. However, Spain, Portugal, and France already had black slaves on the continent before then. I believe the French did. And that's going to deplete Africa, leaving them depopulated, weakening their kingdoms, and eventually will allow the Europeans to colonize and extract huge amounts of goods from Africa in the 19th century. It's all connected. History is a story of patterns and connections. So, what else? There's not much more I can say about this story directly. Columbus remains an interesting and popular figure in American history, especially as Native Americans are continually seen as the enemies of pioneers' westward expansion and manifest destiny, which is how America colonizes the rest of the continental United States, then Alaska and Hawaii in the 19th and late 19th, throughout the 19th century, really. Columbus is seen as a hero who stood up to the natives and got America started in a way. And eventually, the influx of Italian immigrants and the mistreatment of those Italian immigrants makes them want to share their culture and be proud of their history and their connections to the story of America. And the large influx of Italian Americans will eventually point the finger towards Christopher Columbus as being one of the better heroes. It doesn't matter that he was a Spanish Jew. What mattered was that he was from Genoa and believed to be Italian ethnically at the time. And that becomes a huge narrative for Italian Americans who are seeking better treatment and equal rights in a country that is constantly abusing them. I believe it was Cincinnati in the 1880s. A mob attacked and killed several Italian Americans. Italian Americans were targeted and discriminated against heavily throughout especially early on in their times in America. However, what's fascinating is a response to this was to celebrate Christopher Columbus. So in October, based off of roughly the time when he actually arrived on the continent. And so celebrations, unofficial and then later official, I think it was FDR, it might have been FDR, I'm trying to remember exactly who made it a holiday, become popular for Columbus. It's usually observed the second Monday in October. Now, recently, a reinterpretation of American history and an understanding of Columbus's brutality towards the natives and the natives suffering from the results of the Columbian arrival and the subsequent Europeans who kept coming here over and over again has made many people, left a bitter taste in the mouths of many people, especially those of Native and Hispanic descent, when they think about Christopher Columbus. So the attitude now is to celebrate the Native Americans rather than to celebrate Columbus. So Columbus Day has been popularly over the last 30, 40 years been reinterpreted as Indigenous Peoples Day to celebrate the various Native Americans from various different areas. Again, in my opinion, the Native Americans are far too diverse and important to actually celebrate them for a day. Celebrating them for a month would make more sense to me. Perhaps October should be Indigenous Peoples Month, and Columbus Day can stay Columbus Day. At the very least, the history of what Columbus did and the recognition that the world is the way it is and the Western world developed and became what it was because in part of Columbus has to be acknowledged. Columbus took a huge risk and he was wrong about where he was going, but in doing so, he opened the world to an incredible change that set the world in motion to the modern era. You don't get the modern world, the creation of the early modern world, without Spain being able to colonize and create an empire, and then the English and the French going after them. And of course, from that, you get the 13 colonies, then you get the United States, you get French Canada, you get the Portuguese in Brazil, which are huge in understanding the cultures and developments of the Western Hemisphere, and none of that happens without Columbus sailing the ocean blue in 1492. Like him or love him, hate him or despise him, Columbus did that, and the world is completely changed forever because of that. Now, that doesn't mean that that's a good thing, but I happen to like I happen to like living in the Western Hemisphere. I happen to like the development of the world in the Western Hemisphere. So, in some part, some trace of that does credit does belong to Christopher Columbus, but that doesn't mean the overwhelming amount of credit belongs to him, or that acknowledging, or that it's okay to just say he's a victim of his time and whatever, they deserved it. Acknowledging Columbus's sins, like the sins of any historical figure, is a huge step towards better understanding the human condition, which is what history is trying to get us to do all the time. However, there's more to this picture, though. There's one more wrinkle. Columbus, we don't have to have a Columbus Day. We don't have to celebrate a Columbus Day, from my perspective. We could, but we must tell his story, regardless of if we celebrate Columbus Day or not. So perhaps keeping Columbus Day, you guys can read my Substack article, my most recent Substack article. I finally wrote one again about the Columbus Day Indigenous Peoples debate. It's not a long one. It's pinned in the comments. It's a Substack article that I think is good enough that even Harsonet will like it, and he hates my Substack. But basically, Columbus. The attitude there is, if we're not going to celebrate Columbus Day anymore, then it would be patronizing to the diverse and variegated societies of pre-Columbian and indigenous America to only give them one day. Give them a month and let Columbus either have his day or at least tell his story, and tell his story in context, and tell his story compared to other figures of the time period, but also acknowledge that, hey, that's not acceptable, and we've obviously learned a lot. When we talk about enslavement of the natives, enslavement of Africans, enslavement wasn't a bad thing for these people in many of them. Some of them didn't like it. But the vast majority of people believe that the moral debate was, how do you treat your slaves, rather than is it okay to have slaves or not to have slaves. And obviously this is going to be a struggle and an issue in all of Western history, particularly in the United States, and this will lead to the Civil War and current race issues and stuff like that, which can all be traced back to the idea that it is perfectly okay to go to other continents and enslave people. What I say constantly is that the Europeans oppress and colonize. Okay, we're back. What I say constantly on the channel all the time is that the what I'm going to say, what I say constantly here on the channel, and what I'm going to say right now is that the Europeans aren't the first ones to do this. The Europeans do colonize. The Europeans are the first to. Sorry. The Europeans are not the first to do this. The Europeans technology is what makes the difference. The Africans were enslaving each other, the natives were enslaving each other, the Europeans were enslaving each other. The technology is what allows the Europeans to go to Africa and take slaves and bring them over here. It allows people like Columbus to brave the storm and to get here and then to start enslaving people here. Oppression, slavery, conquest, chicanery, betrayal, it's all part of the human condition, no matter what continent or time period you are on. It's that the Europeans had the technology to do it to multiple different groups of people at a much larger scale, which is why I do agree with the narrative that the Europeans have been more oppressive than other societies, but I don't believe it's because there's anything wrong with the Europeans necessarily. It also must be acknowledged that that same practice of slavery was ended by European and Western societies. So it's a very complex issue, as all of history is, and if this live stream lecture has shown you anything, it's the complexity of understanding how you colonize two continents. And when you're talking about the story of two continents, the native peoples there and those who came later to settle them, you obviously are going to deal with intricate complexities, and you're not going to get an easy answer, even from a historian who studied it his whole life like I have. So, again, be okay with the tension, be okay with the paradoxes, be okay with the complexity of the issue. Don't look for answers right away. Add what I've said, take what you like and leave the rest, chew the meat, spit up the bones, to your understanding of history of this land, of Christopher Columbus, of the Native Americans, of the Europeans, and see how it illuminates your idea of how to settle these great debates and issues that we have in our history. Columbus Day wasn't controversial 50 or 60 years ago. It's only become controversial in the last few decades as people as the self-critique of the West, which is an almost completely Western phenomenon, has grown significantly. So consider everything I've said from the perspective and the context of what I am saying it. I like the victim of history argument only because in 100 years I will be dead, most likely, and I want people to remember me, whether I'm famous or just grandpa, as a good person who was stuck in some of in the ruts of his time. This isn't to assume that things just get better and our morality only improves. That's not necessarily true either. But people evolve the way they look at the world, and I don't want to be seen as a bad person because I was stuck living with certain cultural and social expectations in 2025. I want to be remembered as a good person who did my best to do the right thing at all times. So um, it's it's all so maybe that's true for Christopher Columbus. Maybe Columbus didn't care about his legacy. I don't think so. I think Columbus was very concerned about creating something glorious and lasting. And regardless of all the sins and problems of Christopher Columbus, and there are many, in many ways, looking at this map, looking at the map of the United States today, looking at the map of Latin America, looking at the country that bears his name, Colombia, in many ways, directly, indirectly, for good or for ill, Christopher Columbus did just that, create something that was lasting and glorious, but also complex, horrible, and difficult to understand at times. So, in a way, when Christopher Columbus set sail in August of 1492 and arrived in the Americas in October, when he sailed the ocean blue, he was setting sail for glory and for a legacy, and he found just that. Anyways, I hope you've enjoyed that live stream lecture about Christopher Columbus, his holiday, and Indigenous Peoples Day, and the celebration of Indigenous peoples and cultures and societies. Please like and subscribe if you did. We've got about 15 minutes left, so I'll answer questions about history and social studies. I'll look through the chat and see what's going on. So no pressure to like or subscribe or give a super chat or anything. I hope you enjoyed what I said, and hopefully I was as accurate as possible. Please fact check me, hold me accountable, point out when I'm wrong, and I'm happy to learn and grow and develop. Do you think the Jews started communism and Bolshevism? Our first question. No, not directly. People who were Jewish happened to be communists. I think the New World Order is finding out that President Trump, I don't know what you mean. Britannia is owned by Indians. What? Talk about the Hudson Bay. Well, that was just, that was the bay that Henry Hudson discovered when he was an Englishman sailing for the Dutch. What's your favorite part of history to study or talk about? Normally Russian history, but I love all types of history. I did enjoy the conversation. You're very knowledgeable. I appreciate that, Boldly Go. I do what I can. The Jewish Empire is greater. Peter Edmondson, Britain holds zero power. Okay, then. Do you think passenger pigeons were eaten at the first Thanksgiving? I've heard the pigeons were eaten, as well as fish, eel. Turkey may or may not have been on the menu, but ham was not. But even lab-grown meat will have a juicy Aberdeen Angus specimen. What are you talking about, Reynard? Future vegans will think they are barbaric killing animals. They will have lab-grown meat. Many of them gave millions to Hitler. I don't know what you're talking about. Christopher Columbus was a terrible person, and nobody paid attention to it until recently when we decided not to worship toxic things that happened in times just because they were acceptable at that time. It's not, but that betrays the problem. The problem is that there has been a development of a theory of self-critique. The problem is that's been developed by the West, and the West has become powerful, prosperous, and able to do this because of Columbus, partially, because of the colonization of the Western world. Really, the truth of the matter is you don't get Europe at the center of world affairs without this. And that includes a lot of horrible things they did to people. Let me see. Australia, like America, weren't discovered. Goodness. Discovering it what I mean by discovery is creating sustained contact with another power, which connects them to the rest of the world. It's the discovery that will permanently connect them to the rest of the world. And that happened in Australia with Cook, and well, the Europeans knew about Australia before James Cook. But it happened in the Americas with Columbus. America did have breeding slaves. That's very true. Do you think someday we could meet and make Hamburger Helper together? Anytime. You name the day and the place. It's a common historical consensus that slavery has been practiced by the vast majority of human cultures throughout history. Yes. As a Brit, I'm ashamed of our history. We invented the concentration camp. That's true. You used it against the Dutch in the Boer Wars. Maybe you could talk to one of my other moderators about the issues with that. Injustice will be at the root of the destruction of America. Injustice is at the root of every society, if you look close enough. And that's not a whataboutism. I'm simply saying that you can't. It's almost impossible for me, as a historian, in all honesty, to look at any civilization. If I'm going to look for that cynical lens of this country is bad and should feel bad about itself, then I can take that as a cookie cutter almost onto every country. I can't find one that I can't do that for. And that includes the nations of the Native Americans. That includes the Chinese. That includes African societies. That includes the Muslims in the Middle East. That includes the Europeans as well. But the problem I see is that that cookie cutter is usually, not always, but usually applied to European Western societies, the United States and Canada. The Angloid world, if you will. And also the French colonial world and stuff like that. Some cultures that did not have traditional chattel slavery include certain pre-colonial Aboriginal Australian societies and the Maori. Yes, the Australians, they didn't practice chattel, but there is indentured servitude, which is another form of slavery. By the way, chattel slavery is where someone is forced to work for you for the rest of their lives, and their children probably are too. Indentured servitude is where you sell your services or are sold for your services for a specific time period into forced labor, which was common in the early Americas, by the way. Some of the natives, the Africans, and the Irish did that. No one would like to be a slave. I don't want anyone to be a slave. To the most beautiful statues, the most beautiful art, the most beautiful buildings in the world are Italian. Some of the most beautiful art is indeed in Italy. You sound like Candace Owens. What you going to say next? African Americans are happier and richer under segregation? No. And I don't particularly listen to Candace because I use my time wisely. But how am I sounding like Candace Owens at all, Reynard? I don't know how I'm sounding like Candace Owens. I haven't said anything bad about the Jews, so therefore I don't sound like Candace Owens. Why would they be mutually exclusive? What do you mean, why would they be mutually exclusive? Was Nicholas II doomed to fail as a ruler, or could the monarchy have survived with different decisions? I think that Alexander III living longer probably would have ensured Russia would have survived. I think that he shouldn't have gone into the Great War. Of all people, Rasputin warned him not to. That obligation to protect the Serbs really shouldn't have been that binding on him. How is it possible to be a nationalist and a socialist? I don't know. Ask Goering. Sure, we can play ping pong. I'm down. Why can't USA, the greatest power in the world, not win a war? You mean like both of the world wars in the 20th century? The Civil War, the Spanish-American, the Mexican-American, the American Revolution? Those wars? You know that Lenin came in armor training from Germany to Russia as a Trojan horse. Who exactly trained him, in your opinion? Who pulled strings? Well, the Germans actually wanted him to go there because they wanted to. I know you were going for this alpha gay egg, and you want me to just say the Jews are doing this and that. And I don't. I just have to say I don't understand why Groypers are so obsessed with hating Jews. I just don't. It's that cultic negative mania I talked about the other day. People want to hate them so badly, and just. They feel that that's their goal in life, that that's what they'd have to talk about. This is the live stream lecture about Columbus, which you can ask questions about anything you want, but this is what you choose to focus on. Even after I explain to you that just because somebody happened to be a Jew and a communist doesn't mean... I mean, people say this all the time. Marx was a Jew, and don't you hate Marxism, and blah, 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 and Lenin was a Jew, and bad people in history have been Jews, and bad people in history have been Gentiles, and you know who else was a Jew? Jesus and Einstein. So what are you going to do there? You know that... The Germans wanted Lenin in Russia because they knew he would try to overthrow the government, and they felt that he would take them out of the war, and surprise, surprise, they were right. Slaves built the pyramids. Are they the oldest thing standing? Slave labor is good labor? Slave labor is not good labor. Slaves were part of the building of the pyramids. We don't know exactly how much slave labor was used in the building of the pyramids. Ted Cruz responded saying Democrats and Republicans should come together to stop murderers, and then added, let's stop attacking... Oh, jeez. I can't even read that because it's so bad. But sounds like something he would say. Many of the millionaires that are backing the New World Order gave money to Hitler, same families that are backing the New World Order today for a new dark age to come over the world. There are powerful people who want powerful amounts of control. And they do all sorts of things throughout history. I thought Florida was Spanish. Florida was taken by the Spanish, originally Ponce de Leon, one of the conquistadors and explorers that the Spanish sent. Ponce de Leon, Pizarro, Cortez, de Soto. But eventually the English took it for a brief time. The Spanish got it back and the Americans took it. We are still slaves now. You just don't see it. Well, thank you. I'm so glad. Yes, I just clearly can't see it. Louisiana had a black governor, 1800s. Okay. I've never heard you say anything that couldn't be considered anything but objective. I appreciate that. I try to be as fair as possible. And I've been giving my opinion. Einstein was mean to his wife. Yes, Einstein did bad things. Everyone who is good has done bad things, and everyone who is evil has done good things. It's just one of those things where it's like, are you really going to be What did Einstein do to change the world? That's what I want to focus on. Martin Luther King, you could go down this rabbit hole about what a bad person he was to his wife. That's not my point. India versus Pakistan. I don't know. As a Westerner, I lean towards India, but that's just because I'm a Westerner. I just don't know enough. 198 American soldiers got killed in the Spanish-American War. That was only in Puerto Rico. Cuba was a bloodbath. Actually, and that was compared to thousands of Spanish who died in the other areas. Spanish-American War was pretty pathetic. Yes, it made America an empire. It destroyed it ended the Spanish Empire. It got America control over Puerto Rico. I mean, yeah, Harry, you think everything America does is pathetic, so I don't really care. Well, the Civil War doesn't count. It was against yourself. No, the Civil War is the United States destroying a rebellious society. It does totally count. Our federal union must be preserved. It's that America can't win a war without our help. No, and you can't. And how about both of those world wars? How are the British doing at winning both of those wars before the Americans showed up? Just wondering. And how did the British do winning the First World War, the French-Indian War, without the colonial Americans' help? Is at the root of the destruction of every great empire. White privileges and will destroy America. Nicholas II's taking on the role of commander-in-chief and leaving a German to run his country while he was gone was not a smart decision. No, he was incompetent. He didn't want to be czar, and he never should have been. They should have let his brother do it, Michael. Columbus left 39 people behind on his first trip, and the natives killed him. Sure. That sounds about right. If Rasputin had a LinkedIn profile, what would his job title be? Mr. Monk. The Mad Monk. Hello, Angel. Good to see you again. Animal-loving vegetarian. That's true. The Civil War was the destruction of freedom in our republic. Thank you for the stupid... you're not stupid, but your theory is stupid. The lost cause myth. Harry, why do you try and argue that the British are exclusively great above every other country? Because he's a nationalist and a socialist. He's a national socialist. A house divided cannot stand, just like today. The beautiful angel, he is not dark, he's beautiful, and for this many people see that he's bad. I don't even know what you're talking about. World War I, we were actually doing pretty well. World War II, we could have got out anyway, 1940, but chose not to. And thank God you chose not to. And yeah, you were doing okay, but you wouldn't have won the war. The war wasn't going to end. And if you take Russia out of the equation, Germany would have finally been able to unleash the Schlieffen Plan, which probably would have brought France to the point of surrender. Germany, basically, Lenin gave the Germans anything they wanted on the Eastern Front as long as they could get out of the war. Who poisoned the wells? Nobody. Just a figment of your imagination. The Powhatan Confederacy launched a series of coordinated surprise attacks that killed hundreds of colonists in what is now known as the Indian Massacre. Yes, the Indians massacred and attacked Europeans. That's very true, and vice versa. Most of the founding fathers were all British. That's true. Why a UK siren in your background? I don't know. But yes, thank you for recognizing, Bishop. This is my smoking jacket. I am not in London. I am an American. I don't say where in America I'm from. The British begged America for food in both wars because Germany did a starvation blockade. That's not fully true. The British were blockading the Germans pretty successfully in the First World War, but it is true. The American aid was necessary for the British to win both wars. Uh-oh. Oops. The Civil Wars wasn't the same side against each other. That's the whole point of the Civil War, a divided country against each other. No, it was one country, the United States, crushing the Confederacy, which were Americans who were rebels. It counts as an American victory. Plus, I mean, America's military contributions to World War I were minimal. It was more morale and money. Yeah, you need it. So you're agreeing with me. You can't win a war without our money. Got it. In World War II, I mean, again, we could have gotten out and kept our entire empire together, and millions more people would have died and suffered if you had done that. So how selfish are you? Will history show that the Gulf of Mexico is now Gulf of America? I have no idea. It's been called the Gulf of Mexico for so long. It's probably going to stay there. Anyone who says American aid was necessary during both world wars are just ignorant. Yes, and I have ignorant people here. Harry, you can't say that the British are better than every other country military. I'm not denying we needed American money and equipment and manpower in both wars. Again, take Russia out of the war. Take America out. America joins just as Russia exits. What are you going to do? It doesn't make any sense if you actually look at it. Kerensky's government fell because he continued to demand that the Russians fought in the war. So yeah, your money, but you're not men. Not your men. That's not true. It wasn't. It was overwhelmingly Americans who stormed the beaches of Normandy. It was overwhelmingly the how did the British do it before the Americans got there in North Africa? They held their own, but they weren't going to push the Germans and Italians out of there. Most of American culture came from there. The Irish are pretty fascinating. I love the Irish. See, I don't mind the British. I love the British Empire. I love studying the British Empire. I just hate this complete ignorance of history that says the Anglophilism, that's almost like a sadistic form of hating every other country in order to make England better. If you have to hate every other country and undermine them to make yourself look better, you're insecure about your own country, which is what you're doing. I'm not insecure about the United States because I'm willing to acknowledge American weaknesses. What's your favorite? Oh, good. What are your favorite Taylor Swift songs? These are the ones we need to be asking. I'm still the life of the showgirl thing is growing on me, but let me see. Invisible Strings, great. Peace. Those two albums she released in 2020 were really underrated and really, really good. Of course, the 1989 album is great. I'm Black Irish, and so I was forced to conquer America because of forced potato famine. There you go, Reynard. I point out that it was America throttling financial markets that forced you into a war, so good job on that one. That one isn't true either. Did Hitler help build Israel? No. Now, Britain would have been fine without America. They had no chance of liberating Europe on their own, though. Yes, the liberation of Europe would have... Hitler was willing to give favorable terms to the British, but who knows what that would have led to in the long run, and Churchill would not appease him. So either, on the one end, either you get Churchill doing his great stand, and that means you need the Americans, or you get Europe suffering under the Nazi regime and more appeasement that doesn't work in the long run. So either way, you need to admit you lose that debate. Either the British are weak and cowardly and don't need the Americans, or the British desperately need the Americans to help them defeat the Nazis. So, what's your favorite historical fiction author? Harry Turtledove. Friendly history. Who has a smarter view of history, me or Harry? I think you're both very, very stubborn. Go look up Wilson's threatening of financial markets to try and force Britain and France to go bankrupt, and tell me I'm not right. You're not right. I don't need to look it up to know you're not right. The war had already been going on for a long time. And by the way, that just proves, on my point, that Wilson and the Americans were extremely influential economically. In your opinion, did Roosevelt take advantage of Churchill toward the end? Yes. He literally went to the Federal Reserve and said that you must declare Britain unfavorable investment, which forced the British government and JP Morgan into emergency bond purchases. Hars hates Woodrow Wilson because he thinks he's a bad president. You hate Woodrow Wilson because you have a crazy mania about making the British look good at the cost of all other countries. You are not the same. As well as the purchase of sterling en masse because Americans started offloading it. That just sounds like savvy American business planning for me. Yes, they throttled the financial markets because they were the only, but there was no financial market that wasn't tied into war other than the American one. They were the dominant force because all the other countries were relying on them. They were loaning out huge amounts of money. That's how America became so wealthy after the war. Why does Eisenhower look scary? He was scary. He was a general. Do you know why the Dutch settled on Mauritius specifically? Not sure. They didn't stay there that long. Yeah. He basically wasn't president for the last 2 years of his administration. I don't care. Can we stop talking about Woodrow Wilson? Let me see here. So, anyways, I don't know why this got into Woodrow Wilson and world wars. It's because Harry can't admit the British do anything wrong and can't admit the Americans do anything right and have an advantage. Yes. If I start talking about Woodrow Wilson, he will flip holy hell. Yes, I'm just going to end the live stream instead because apparently my moderators, once again, decide that they get to decide what we talk about, which is not true. I do. There I was seated between the great American eagle and the imperial Russian bear, a poor English donkey, but the only one that knew the way. Yep, that sounds like something Churchill would say. Let me see. What did you do? You didn't do anything today. Can you not choose your moderators? I can choose my moderators. I've chosen good moderators who know a lot about history, which is why I keep them. But they basically decide once in a while that they know more than I do. And sometimes they do. But a lot of the time they do not. And I don't mind the knowledge. What I mind is the insistence that they have to, for Harry at least, the British have to be right. And the Americans have to be wrong. I can let the British be right when the British are right. And I can do vice versa. But I'm not going to just sit here and say, so the British starved millions of people in India, then they starved millions of people in Ireland. So I'm looking for when the Americans starved millions of people. If you're going to do this nickel and diming of morality and who's the better, and our empire is better because of this and that, and your empire is bad because of this and that, I don't care. I really don't care about the empire debate. I think the British did have the most successful empire in world history. I don't think it's hard to argue that. But when you do that at the cost of insulting other countries to the point where you're ignoring the history, then I'm going to have a problem with that, because you're being irresponsible to the history to fulfill your own nationalist socialist ambitions. So, yeah, he agrees with me. Horace, I do not agree with you. There's a lot that I don't agree with you on. You do not understand James Polk. You do not understand Manifest Destiny, or Jacksonian democracy at all. So there's an American who doesn't know his history. He knows a lot about other types of American history, but not that. We joined the European Union in 1973. We didn't stop Ireland getting independence in 1921. See, all of your arguments are based on the empire fell because of that. So it's this ultra-nationalist argument that I don't like this because we did this and it hurt the empire, rather than was an adjustment to the modern world that was changing at the time and needed those changes. So, can you tell us about Danish history? So Denmark gets 1840s, ends its monarchy, and establishes a republic. I think it's 1848 or 1849, same year all the other Europeans did it. Yes, and the British use chemical weapons in Ethiopia. Peter, are we really going to go down this road? If you don't care or understand, why are you taking time to comment? I think you don't protest too much. Yes, it basically was Americans taking over that land. Irish potato famine was not deliberate. Yes, it was. Yes, it was. The British diverted food from Ireland to Britain. It's actually probably the worst atrocity the British have ever done. It's worse than the Bengal famine, where they were kind of forced into that circumstance because of a war. I understand the historical context. I give the British their historical context, but that's not good enough, apparently. So, how about Ecuadorian, bro? I do understand Manifest Destiny and James Polk. We disagree on intention. His intentions, not the facts. Sure. And you don't have any evidence of his intentions, and I do, so there you go. How about Ecuadorian? So Ecuador, I believe it is named because it is so close to the equator, is part of the Spanish colonization. It's part of the viceroyalty, I believe, either one of Granada or, sorry, I'm blanking, or Peru. I think it's Granada. Yes, that was a mess. We can agree there. So let's just agree there. Do you know Grito de Lares? Isn't that the beginning of a Mexican Revolution with Father Miguel Hidalgo? Is North Ireland Catholic? Mainly more Anglican. Yes, that's very true. I don't see why you have to twist my stance to make yourself seem less ignorant than me. Not fair play in a conversation. I'm not twisting your view. Your view is very simple. James Polk did manifest destiny to expand slavery, and that's just not true. Oh, Puerto Rico Grito de Lares. I don't know that specifically. You're a jealous geezer because Britain is great. The British are great. They are. I'm just not going to say the British are great no matter what, and the Americans suck. So, I do understand Manifest Destiny. How about Ecuadorian? I already answered that. Let me see here. 1421 roots to the homeland of Spain. Then my family came to conquer Mexico. Made our way up to what is known in America today. Thank you for sharing that, Tony. I appreciate that. Let me see. What else? Anything else? The British government did one massive atrocity on when it came to the Irish Britannia. I think me, friendly, history, and harsh all need to get on a Discord voice channel and have a proper conversation. Prophets when you don't know. It's a fact. Before the USA invaded Sicily, SAS were sent in first. Yes. I'm very well aware of how war works. You can't just say I have no evidence for my view and you do, hence you are at a better position. I do have evidence for my stance. I've shared it. Acknowledge that. The evidence has nothing to do with it. It's circumstantial and it's completely built on a hypothesis. It's not built on what the Democrats were actually trying to do at the time. It's not built on Jacksonian democracy at all, which saw slavery as just an incidental thing that happens as you go and spread over land. Some of that land is going to belong to slave owners. Why so many people in British have dirty-looking teeth? At least the rumor has it. Jeez, I don't know. I don't even buy into that stereotype, but I'm happy somebody had something bad to say about Great Britain in the chat for once. On the Five Eyes, which country has the best intelligence agency? I'm not sure. CIA's obviously got its tentacles in stuff more than any of that. When is this Discord coming? It's desperately needed because we need a voice channel. That would be interesting. We'll do it soon. I'm obviously very busy and really, really going through a lot right now, but I enjoyed doing this today. This was a lot of fun. Why is it that Europe starts all the world wars? Listen to the rest of the live stream. Europe has such a predominant effect on the world due to the colonization of the New World, which made them wealthy, and then extend that into the colonization of Africa and Asia, that they call a lot of the shots when it comes to world politics in the 19th and 20th centuries. The total land area of the United States is about 40 times larger than the United Kingdom. Steve, I didn't know that I don't know if he knows that. I'm going to pin that. I'm going to frame that, and that'll be how I answer every one of his statements. So yes, British should have kept USA. They didn't want to. They kind of gave it up. Why are Americans most hated people in the world? Probably because they're most successful. The most successful are often the most hated. Sorry, Peter. Let me see, what else? Otters are cute. That is all. They are indeed very cute. Because Americans are so in love with their freedom. That's also a big problem with America. Yeah, the USA is a lot bigger than the UK. When have I ever said that it isn't true? Well, except in 1921 when Britain controlled a quarter of the world. I'm sorry. Isn't that kind of over? And the United States didn't need to control the world to control the world. They didn't need to territorially build an empire to have a hegemonic control over the world when they basically created NATO, the United Nations, and all other international organizations that allowed them to leverage their control in Central and South America, Europe, and large sections of Africa and Asia. I remember your arguments and evidence. I just don't agree with them. So thoughts on... Do you know who is Ramon? No, I do not know who that is. Let me see here. Sounds like America is the Jews of the world. Basically, you're very successful, so people hate you. Sorry if you already answered this, but is it America's duty to be ashamed of Columbus as you have been moving the last 15 years, or should we embrace him as the first mover? I do the first mover thing, but there is a lot. But if you're going to there's different ways to go about this, and I'll finish with this. And this is back to the Columbus stuff. Great question, Gaiahan. But basically, on the one end, you can do the United States wasn't founded by the Spanish, so we don't have anything to do with Columbus. And that's a little historically ignorant, but you can do that. And then you have to deal with the founding fathers and their sins, and the British and their sins in 1619. But on the other end, and that's not as bad as the Spanish in some ways, but on the other hand, you can acknowledge Columbus, talk about how terrible he was, but also look at what he did to start the world the way it is, and that's what I did. So I think you have to answer two questions, like who is Columbus morally, and how responsible is Columbus for the United States, or for the United States and Canada, for America, for I think it would be harder to make that debate that he's not responsible for Latin America, because obviously the Spanish colonized Latin America because of Columbus starting that off. But the United States and Canada are kind of on their own wavelength, so it's hard. But if you want to acknowledge Columbus, which I think is the more historically responsible thing to do, you need to do the prime mover, but you also need to realize that he did some horrible things to people. Unconscionable. Even for his day. Some of it was really bad. Yeah. So, it is disingenuous to think you know my whole argument and evidence, and then to slam everything you think is my argument and my evidence as consequential or circumstantial. It's not disingenuous when it turns out that those arguments are indeed circumstantial and yeah, I don't know what other word to use. Let me see. Who am I skipping? Someone said I'm skipping. What animal do you think we as humans have done the most wrong by in history? That's a good question. Probably elephants. America was the most hated. That's why so many people are trying to come here more than any other country. That's the funny thing about American history, is that America can be very hated, but the vast majority, the French hate the Americans, but more French have come to America than Americans gone to French, overwhelmingly. Canada right now, everyone's like, oh, Canada is the good, reasonable part, and America's just crazy because of Trump, but twice as many Canadians come to the United States as vice versa. People just don't want to deal with that because there's probably a jealousy thing. Just as there was a jealousy thing with the British Empire a century ago. Let me see here. You don't know my argument or evidence. You are strawmanning me. I'm not strawmanning anything. I know your argument. It's wrong. The map behind you shows Florida is part of British territory, which was partially true for a time. Yes, I know what strawmanning is. It's making a weak argument. I actually steel man most arguments. America, Columbia come from Catholic explorers' days. Oh, there you go. Yeah. They hate us because they ain't us. I don't even know if that's fully true. I just think that there's a lot of misconceptions about America, but there's also a lot of hope with America. The cult there, maybe because of America as a cult, that would be more true. Worst people hurt in history, Native Americans. That's not true. That's completely false, by the way. The Chinese actually, with Mao's devastation, were far more hurt. And to prove it's a cult, you still get double tax wherever you go if you're all an American citizen. Yeah, that's kind of fair. Um, America does destabilize other countries. I'm telling you, you don't know my argument or evidence yet. You continue to establish I'm wrong about that. Why my own personal arguments and evidence is. Yeah, it's not evidence. It's circumstantial speculation. Mm-hmm. Yep. Only hope for America is for the rich. That's true. There's a lot of that's true. But I think you're just a bitter Brit. And it's funny because the Brits are very bitter about America when they should be proud because America is their child. My life has been so ugly, I wish people would fill it with more beauty. Well, I hope that this has filled you and the rest of you all with some beauty today. We did a 30 minutes of Q&A after a 50-minute live stream lecture about Columbus and the history there. Yeah, Puerto Rican flag came from. I did not know that. Thank you, Angel, for sharing that. I really appreciate you doing that. I do know a bit of a history of Puerto Rico. I think that Columbus discovers it in his second voyage, the rich port, Puerto Rico. And it's obviously a very well settled, very controlled by the Spanish until the late 19th century, and when the last vestiges of their empire are destroyed by the Americans, not the Brits, the Americans, it becomes an American territory and has been one ever since, and a lot of people think it will be the 51st state if Greenland and Canada don't go there first. Yeah, so anyways. You would not like to be one. How many Brits are there compared to how many Americans there are? Just wondering, just curious. Come on, America is a very funny country. It's hilarious to watch outside, especially from a European perspective. See, that's what I don't like. Because I'm an American, I clearly know what I'm talking about, and so do a lot of other Americans. It's just this idea that America is full of hicks and idiots. It's actually kind of racist. Does America take resources from other countries? Yes, absolutely they do. And they also give resources to other countries. In fact, more than any other country does. Canada would kick your butts. That's why Canada's economy is about to collapse, and people are talking about annexation. But yeah, you can't tell me what my argument and evidence is when I'm telling you that what you think my argument and what? I don't get that. Do you believe the theory that the specific elephant Hannibal rode was an extinct type of straighter tusked elephant? I have heard that this was a bigger size and tusk. If it was Hannibal, he was going to pick the biggest and the baddest. So I think that's very possible. We just heard that the British people have got bad teeth, and that idea that American people are stupid is pretty widespread. I did not say the British people have bad teeth. I don't think that's true either. I think that's a stereotype. Some of them do, some of them don't. Plenty of Americans have bad teeth. You could thank the funny news for making the world think was stupid. All they want to be. Genuine question: is there any root cause for Jewish persecution, which has waxed and waned over the centuries? Europe, mainly for the rejection of Christ. The Muslim world now for the rejection of Muhammad, for the rejection of Sharia and all of that. The refusal to assimilate, cultural uniqueness, and economic success have all been major reasons why the Jews have been persecuted so heavily. See, you said it. I didn't say it. You don't know my perspective about Polk, and I'm telling you that you don't. You can't tell me I'm wrong about your understanding my perspective of Polk. Very simple. Is your perspective of Polk that he basically went to war in order to expand slavery in the United States by conquering Texas and the Southwest? Because that's basically what you said your perspective is. So in case you are changing your perspective, that's pretty much what you've said. I received your membership recently. What are the benefits? You get early access. You get some. I'm going to be doing my Industrial Revolution videos soon, I hope. And you guys, those are members only. So there are members only videos, both short and long form, and there are member only. And eventually, when we have enough members, we'll have member only chats and live streams and stuff like that for the members and my wonderful mods who do a great job, even if they're argumentative, with promoting the channel, sharing information and facts, and helping us grow and become a better version of ourselves. Does American government cater to corporations and screw working class people? Yes. You can stop with the leading questions. We get it. America sucks, D. Hogan. How often do you stream? I stream every Friday and Saturday for Q&A, 6 p.m. Eastern, and then Sundays usually 4 p.m. Eastern, but we did a special because it was Columbus Day. Yeah. And again, like I've said, you are in a very small minority of Americans who are very clever, but the vast majority of Americans are very stupid. I don't even know what to say with that. Do you encourage others to take membership? I do, but you don't have to. I don't put any pressure. Yeah, I don't even know how to respond to what Harry just said. Um, no, countries have actually been great countries. There's always horrible people in the world, and that's not just one country. Yep, Frog Lover's absolutely right. No, do you know how Jewish people came to Puerto Rico when it was under Spain? Probably when they were expelled from the mainland, from Iberia. Um, the Jews have been kicked out of 109 countries. F Israel. Israel didn't exist when they were getting kicked out of most of these countries until a lot of Arab countries kicked them out after the Arab-Israeli War of 1948. That includes the Nazis. Those numbers, those statistics include the French and the English. Them being kicked out of countries, that's victim blaming. That is the classic example of victim blaming. The people who get kicked out of a country deserve to be kicked out. Did the Sioux deserve to be kicked out of the plains and have their land stolen by the Americans? Because it's the same logic, by the way. Um, so 95% of the country put Trump in, so we're doing something right. Oh, jeez. Yeah. Is collapse inevitable in long-term human history? Civilizations rise and they fall. They become stale, weak, and fall apart. Why don't you think of writing a book? I've written a lot, but I don't have time to write a book. Um, yeah, that's true. Vast majority of everyone are stupid. That's fair. That's a fair one. Um, Let me see. Unfortunately, I agree. That's why I'm watching right now. I don't want to be amongst the willful ignorant. Well, thank you for joining us to be not willful ignorant. What's going on in America at the moment somehow seems worse than the UK somehow. The UK is not as stable as you think it is. In fact, they're having huge economic problems. They have the huge migratory issues. They have a rise of the far right. There's a lot going on. Did the Mormons deserve to be kicked out of Ohio, Missouri? I don't know. I would like to say no. Shiny metal is not fake. He's acknowledging America's mistakes patriotic because that's all I'm doing so we can correct ourselves. Yeah, it's part of it that's patriotic. Was Poland the de facto Jewish state before Israel? I'm not well versed on Jewish history, but it seems like such. There are a lot of Jews in Poland because the other European countries that kicked them out. Given your broad view of history, what do you see for the trajectory of the United States? I think it's a society in decline, and I think that the vast majority of Americans believe it's a society in decline. And that's bad. When your society starts to realize itself is in decline, that's a sign of real major problems, because it wasn't until the very end that the Romans knew they were falling apart. Have you seen the state of American politics, and you're telling me that the UK had a problem with the far right? Yes, I'm saying, like I said yesterday, which you clearly did not listen to, I'm saying that the Reform Party comes and has become extreme and powerful and will probably be the largest party in Britain over your next elections because the center-right parties have proven to be basically controlled opposition for the left-wing parties. This has allowed more radicalization around the far right in Britain and Nigel Farage is basically tantamount on the right. So, yes, the far right is on the rise. I'm saying that that's something that couldn't be seen happening in Britain. America is much more conservative, so it's understandable for a conservative party to have a lot of power like Trump does now. BB is a dictator. 10/7 was an inside job, just like 9/11. Thank you for sharing your ignorance with us. I hope it's not a willful one. I mean, to be fair, reform is 100% winning the next British election. The idiot Biden almost bankrupted America. See, this is what we get in the chat. We get people on the right, people on the left, and people who just want to throw their opinions everywhere and all at once. And yeah, they're asking me, and I'm giving my opinion sometimes, but they're asking me because I'm an expert on history, and apparently that makes me an expert on politics, which usually I only talk about politics if it's going to be a super chat, but yeah, we'll see. I have no idea about the politics. The more I learn about the stupider it gets. More stupid. They aren't far right. They are just right. They aren't like the Haiti gangs. Immigration ratios? That's not far right enough to you? With no one to live. Oh, I've heard about that. I don't know what it is. Whataboutism doesn't really absolve Britain of its problems. Do you think reform is a problem for the UK and why? And also, do you think it will have a massive impact on the rest of the world? I think I don't want to share my own political views one way or another. I don't do that. But I do think that there has been a failure of the center-right the Christian Democrats, the conservatives in Britain and Canada, to actually build an answer to Labour, liberals, the Social Democrats, people like that. And because of that, you have this outcry from the far right, which is extremely nativist and extremely retrograde. Let me see here. What was Ronald Reagan's impact on U.S. history? Brought about the end of the Cold War in many ways. He basically made America a center-right country. America had been pretty much a centrist country. Reagan reawakened conservatism in the United States, and it is the reason the United States is as conservative as it is compared to other parts of the world. Was Columbus right in wanting to defeat the Muslims? Obviously, Columbus felt that by building up power and glory for Spain, as many explorers did, they could weaken the Muslims, and eventually that turned out to be true. British government also won't investigate the gangs. Yes, I've heard about this. Is nationalism patriotic or radical? Nationalism is, in my opinion, neutral. It's what you do with the nationalism. Can you have extreme pride in your country and celebrate your holidays, acknowledge your country's faults, and grow your understanding of yourself as a person and your country as a whole? Yes. Nationalism can be good and nationalism can be bad. Just ask Kerry, the National Socialist. Yes. Do you know who Jack Welch is? I've heard the name before. What are the three qualities of Ronald Reagan that made him so big? Great communicator. So he was charming, he was slick, he was manipulative, but he was also extremely reasonable in the sense that he was able to listen, he was able to work with other people. He was far more bipartisan than he gets credit for, and he was also firm when he needed to be. He had this ability to, like all good leaders do, to major in the majors and minor in the minors. A bit like Donald Trump won't release the Epstein files in full. Yeah, that's not going to happen. We need to stop talking about it. Are we still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? Sorry, I had to say that. 14 million uninvented aliens. That sounds right. Unvetted aliens. Does that sound right to you? Did you know that 11 of the 13 original colonies voted to end slavery? I did know about that. It was the Continental Congress that stopped them. Was Fred Trump part of the KKK? He was at least sympathetic to them. I mean, I love when people ask that just so that they can throw shade at Trump. His mother was an immigrant. Look at how he thinks about immigrants. Someone's parents doesn't define them. A person who loves his country, who holds socialist opinions when it comes to the economy. No, not the no-no Germans. Yes, a nationalist and a socialist. The Nazis were national socialist. When is the Halloween costume vote? We got 3 weeks for Halloween, so okay, we'll get there. With 1/4 of the world popular Muslim, is it fair to make any extrapolation about the political inroads in the democratic countries? The population grows, they'll vote for people who represent them. Look at, you'll see it. You can see more secular, popular Muslims like Zohran Mamdani right now. What is the advantage and disadvantage of Puerto Rico becoming a state? Why hasn't the votes passed? The huge issue about Puerto Rico becoming a state is all politics. It's the Republicans don't want it because it'll be a democratic state. It will give democratic electoral votes to a democratic presidential candidate, and it will give democratic senators and congresspeople to the United States Congress. So, is Trump an egotistical brat? Yes, but don't tell him I said that. Is it true Diddy is a Jew? Yes, Diddy clearly is a Jew. Just look at him. Hispaniola isn't doing too hot, especially the Haitian part of it. Henry Ford gave money to the Nazi Party. The Rockefellers have done a lot of dirty dealings. What does that mean? Rich people try to control the world. I don't want the mass murder of Jewish people, nor do I want to have world domination for Germany. Instead of that, I want for Britain. But anyway, I'm not a no-no German. Okay, but you're a national socialist. We got it. Don't Muslims want to conquer the world? Doesn't everybody want to rule the world? Just listen to that song by Tears for Fears. Yeah. So, where is Indonesia? Where in Indonesia? Or where is Indonesia? I'll finish with this one because I said I would finish and then I got so distracted that we went an extra 20 minutes. But Indonesia is in Southeast Asia in the South China Sea. It was colonized by the Dutch and eventually freed in the 1940s by a man named Sukarno after the last World War. Okay, so thank you everyone for a good live stream, for hanging in there, for the Q&A afterwards. Did you ever play sports in high school or college? I'm not very athletic. But yes, please like and subscribe on your way out. We'll be back Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern. Check out the long-form video that'll drop at 8 p.m. Eastern tonight about Columbus Day, a revamped one from last year. And Q&As Friday and Saturday next week, and then Sunday we have our live stream lecture. You guys get to vote on that topic here on YouTube. And thank you for joining us for our live stream lecture on Columbus Day and for enjoying some friendly neighborly history. Take care. Have a great rest of your week. And as always, love history. Bye-bye now.